Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Archives Book Club. I am Eret, here, of course, with my co-host Adraseth. Joining us today is a man you may know from his career as a premier WCS caster. You've seen him on such fabulous Twitch.television programs as The Backseat, Wayfarers, the eponymous PiG Show, and many more. Welcome, PiG, to the show. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And after a big binge of a lot of fiction and a lot of the Expanse novels, you guys have finally given me an excuse to sit down and actually, well, not even read, listen to. So I am still lazy. Some nonfiction. So I feel like this has been a really good impetus to expand my brain a little bit. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the audiobook club. So no judgment there. Of course, chat, as always, moderated by our very own Lord Cranial, my young Lord Cranial. So any, interesting discussions, Q&A that folks have, he's going to be capturing all that. We're going to try to stay, on topic, working through our show notes for most of the show, and then we'll kind of circle back and do some fun chat topics at the end here. So with that, Adraseth, do you want to intro the book here?
Yeah. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode. Today, we're going to talk about the book Range, and that is written by David Epstein. This is a book that is interesting. I heard about it nearly a year ago on an NPR podcast, and it's about diversity in your training and how that can improve your learning, your ability in sports. There's a lot of examples in science and learning and education and so on. It's basically about how being diverse can lead to training excellence and excellence in all sorts of fields. And this is a really interesting book, I think, because when we relate it to StarCraft, with a diverse game like StarCraft, I think there's a lot to learn from this book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway that I had, so this is my second read now of Range, and the biggest thing that I think is kind of a challenge with applying this material, and actually with all of the material that we've done, any episode, any different book in the archives, is the scoping that we put around these concepts. I feel like, what we define as range dramatically changes the way that I would apply these concepts to my practice, right? So like, is diversity, do I have to play all the races? Is it, I have to play some aggro play style, some cheeses, some macro? Is it like I have to do, maybe I like aggressive builds. Do I have to have a diversity of builds within, those aggro builds, or diversity of macro builds, or what have you? Is it playing other games? Do I have to go like download a MOBA? Do I have to go play like traditional sports? Do I need to like play tennis to get better at StarCraft? Like, what scoping do we put on it, right? Because you can sit here and paint all these different arguments depending on how you define that diversity. So I'm curious, just straight off the bat, if either of you have thoughts on that.
I think that's a really interesting one because, yeah, this is such a vast thing. And I think there was so many wow, that's a really fascinating thing that I've learned during listening to this book. But I think at the end of it, when I was thinking back and I was like, wait, what were all the individual takeaways? And, how can you boil it down? And I think, he does a great job in the conclusion as well, does the author, where he's just kind of saying, you can't really boil this down to just one sentence of like self-help that's gonna, these tiger parents who want their kids to become the best piano player in the world or the best athlete, like, because the whole point of the book is that it needs to be a self-directed sort of leading by your nose, things that fascinate you and interest you, and you can't, to be very like a broken record, it's the journey that matters, not the destination. You can't know the destination ahead of time, is the whole point. Is all these breakthroughs, these amazing discoveries that people have made, or a love of an instrument, or a way of creating some innovation, some area, it always comes, almost always, without them really realizing where it's going to happen beforehand.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like kind of a frustrating, like somewhat unsatisfying conclusion, right? It's like, oh yeah, you just have to take the harder road. You're like, well, no, I'm reading this book because I want a shortcut. Like, give me the shortcut.
When we were putting together the notes of the last couple days for this episode, I was really happy that Eric put as the first topic of like, what is the scope of this book and how do we apply it? Because it's exactly the question I had when I was going through it as well. And I thought even further on than just, do we play different races within StarCraft or different builds? It's like, should we all go and play some League of Legends or go play some CS:GO for a while and then come back?
Right.
Is video games in general, is that broad enough? Should we be playing some other game like poker and then come back to StarCraft?
Hmm.
And I think it is like getting to the conclusions, which is I love summarizing books actually by going to the meat of it at the end and saying like, bring that forward to the front, because that's what everybody wants to know. What's the shortcut?
Right.
And the reality is that, well, it's there's no shortcut exactly, and you have to find your wandering path and take it, but don't be afraid that that path wanders.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think there's the big thing for me is it's a paradigm shift that can happen if you really take into account what the book's trying to say, and some of the things it points out. It is that, so many of us are within that paradigm of you can't fall behind, you can't not, you want to have an early head start. That's going to be big. You've got to grind that one thing. Once you've invested in something, you've got to keep investing in it. The sunk cost fallacy is something that comes up again and again in the book,
Right.
which is pure irrationality. It's I've got to keep doing the thing because I did it in the past, and it's talk about digging a hole for yourself. I think it's this idea of let's change the idea around what success looks like, or what a path to learning more looks like, and instead replace that idea of grinding down one path and putting yourself ahead of the pack with number one, following your nose. That the things that excite you, find the things that you like. That's one of the big parts of it for me, what I really think about. And another part is, not only follow your nose, but embrace hardship. And that is something where if you can train yourself to almost be happy to take that painful task, or to kind of go into that problematic situation and be willing to fail, it's kind of all wrapped up. If you're willing to take a non-traditional path, you're basically, a big part of that is trying to get over fear of failure and get over fear of doing a less efficient path. So many of us are so afraid of taking the wrong step, whether it's in a StarCraft match or if it's in a career path. It's so hard to abandon what you've been working on and go in a new direction. But that is essentially how you're going to find the perfect fit for you. And I think that's one of the really, I believe it's something very similar to, finding your perfect match is kind of what a lot of these paths that are explored throughout the stories in the book, whether it's, Renaissance musicians, or it's someone who's innovating at a big business executive level. It's like, for them, it's finding their very specific good match of what they can apply their skills to in a really effective way. And that's an interesting thing. It's like, basically it's this realization that we are very bad at picking a path for ourselves because we evolve as humans, we're changing a lot and stuff. So
Hmm.
I think it's like, yeah, embrace that really crappy looking, that's going to put you behind path. Maybe it's going to be harder as well. The lessons which seem like you're not improving, it just seems hard and you can't quickly track progress. Be super suspicious of that. I think so many of us have that instinct. If you can't immediately see
Yep.
progress, you think you're going nowhere. And I think there's a few chapters in there that kind of debunk that, where it's like, hey, the best actual teachers were the ones the students tended to not like very much at all.
Right.
They were like, this teacher sucked, you didn't teach me anything. And years later, they were remembering the knowledge, they were doing better when they had to do follow-up tests on it. And you're like, oh crap, like the thing which you think is good for you is not always exactly the case.
Yeah. And this is like super consistent across a lot of the books that we've looked at, right? I think the one that jumps out for me is Make It Stick, where the big message that they keep hammering you with in that book is like, yeah, the part where you're like really frustrated about your learning process, that's when the good stuff is happening, actually. And I really liked kind of some of the parallels that you made here, the examples you brought up in this book, Pig, where the thing that you did that like you thought was a waste, it was this rabbit trail in your life that You know, it wasn't ultimately the direction that I went to. Like I definitely have the personality trait of being very hard on myself and saying those things. Oh, that was a mistake. You know, I shouldn't have done that. It was a waste of time. How many years of my life? Blah blah blah. And it really can end up informing total, you know, seemingly completely unrelated stuff down the road in a way that you would never expect, right? And that might be even unique to you. And the book has tons of examples of that as well, where, you know, it's like, unless you were specifically that person with this like random hodgepodge of shit as your life experience, you would never have an epiphany like that.
Mm-hmm. I highlighted a quote here from the book, and I think that it's a little bit wordy, but it kind of embraces what you both identified in the book. And it says, breadth, and he's talking about focused praxis when he's talking about this. Breadth often supports insights that cannot be attributed to domain-specific expertise alone. And that means basically, if you have a lot of diversity in your learning and your skill set, you're going to be better off than if you're hyper focused on one thing. And essentially, we've come to that point, like Era, you just brought up in multiple books, right? That
Right.
if you look at the scientific studies, the neuroscience, the cognitive psychology, again and again and again, it shows that if you're hyper focused on things and it's easy, you don't learn. You have to have this sort of wide diversity, difficult. There's a lot of steps to actually learning effectively.
Right. Yeah. And this is, I think, what I found so challenging, right? So, you know, back to the kind of thing I posed of like, you know, it feels like, you know, we've been doing this book club. We're like 11 books in now. And like the central challenge is the scoping thing. And I almost like, either of you ever read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? It's not a nonfiction book. It's just a story.
I've heard great things about it, but no.
So have you, Andrew Seth?
I haven't read it now.
Okay, so to shortcut it, because neither of you have read it, there's a part of the book where this dude is like a college professor, becomes obsessed with this idea of like what is quality in writing, and he like totally loses his mind. He like actually goes off the deep end over like obsessing over this question, right? And I kind of felt like that dude from that story, thinking about this thing about scoping. I'm just like losing my shit, trying to, okay, well, you know, how do I do it, right? Because reading this book, I'm thinking about it. I'm like, well, shoot, man, you're telling me, you know, I need breadth, I need diversity, I need for things to feel unfamiliar and uncomfortable and all this stuff. Well, I'm the guy that like learns one build per matchup and just tries to like get good at that, right? And again, like my self-critical personality comes out. I'm like, oh, am I wrong? Am I bad? Am I dumb? Am I wasting my time? And all of these things. You know, I think back to conversations I've had with players that are much better than me, who've said, yeah, you know, you got to just, you know, learn the billions of directions that the long macro game can go and all this stuff. I'm like, well, I kind of really like timings, and, you know, I like to see where it goes from there. And so I realized as I'm like tearing myself apart with this question that it comes down to scoping, right? So if I scope it to the game of StarCraft and all the things that can happen if I spawn as Protoss, right? That's one scoping, and the lessons in the book would apply to that. Or I can say, here are all of the different reactions my opponent might have to me hitting this timing. Let me learn that diversity. Or let me learn all the weird stuff they might do to me in the early game to where I can't even hit my timing off my two bases because they were down my throat on one base before it ever happened, right? And I like, it feels like, okay, you know, in one regard, the message of the book is, well, yeah, it's whatever, just take your little meandering path and everything will be happy and good, right? But also it does feel like there has to be a little bit more than that to sort of narrow it down, or else like, why are we reading books and trying to think about the more efficient way to do it, right? Like I have to be able to put it on the rails somehow.
Yeah.
Got to get some actionable points, right? I feel you. You got to get some. There's always got to be something you can take out. It's the same thing. I can sometimes, and I used to do this more often, where I'd read a book that would kind of, I feel like, oh, it expanded my mind in some way.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm a big believer, if I can't then apply it in some way to my daily thinking, or how I change my thinking, or I change my life, if I can't get at least a few little actionable points, it's like, did I really understand it? Did I really learn anything? Is this really sticking in my head? Or is it like I got to have a cool thought in my head, I got to go, ooh, that's novel, and then it kind of goes out the other ear and disappears forever? And it's like, where do you get that actionable point? And I think it's interesting with StarCraft and this book especially Range, because StarCraft, I mean, he gives it as an example in the book where chess is this incredibly kind environment. For anyone listening who didn't watch it, it's like, basically it's kind or unkind or wicked are the two kind of extreme ends. Kind is highly repeatable. You can go off instinct. You just get enough pattern recognition. You know enough permutations. You've just memorized a lot of the details. You can be super duper specialized and perform insanely well. And then the more dynamic something is, the more unexpected situations, the more unkind it is, the more wicked it is, right? The harder it is to just be a specialist and to do that. And StarCraft is this thing where mechanically it is incredibly specialized. It is something where if you can grind individual mechanics and things, and there's so many areas that will reward you for being just studious at applying the same thing and getting hundreds and thousands of repetitions, and the speed the game is played at means that that's the same thing. We don't normally think of it as muscle memory or mechanics, but it is pattern recognition in terms of, oh, I'm going in. Does my Widow Mine drop go in to 4 Stalkers or turn and try to drop the Widow Mines, or does it turn around and pull back because I know it's going to get shot down before the Widow Mines get out? You need to be able to recognize that in a frame. And you watch a Serral, you watch a Dark, you watch a Maru, and they're doing that constantly throughout the game. And that is only acquired through just grinding, through pattern recognition. You need to have ground enough games. On the other hand, there is this extreme strategical end of the game, which rewards range in how you approach the game. Look at Haas. That's a guy, holy crap, is he not specialized in certain areas of the game which people think are fundamental? And we're constantly like, how can you be so bad at macro or this thing and so good at other things? What's wrong with you, Haas? And stop beating my favorite pro gamers. It's stupid. No, you're not good at this game, because he's so much worse at specializing with certain things. But that being said, his early game micro, you'll shit on his micro, his army control. And then you talk to pros and they're like, no. Like, his 2 adepts are the best 2 adepts you've ever played against. His oracle is the best oracle you've ever played against. He does still have those little nuggets that he's very good at. But when it comes to his strategic range, he has found a way to make the game as wicked as possible, as unkind as possible for his opponent. He's always screwing the game up, forcing it off those lines where there are thousands of extra repetitions with a certain situation are going to help them. And he's like, nah, you're in my ballpark now. I can feel things out. I can use my intuition. And, I used to always think of it as like, well, he's experienced the cheesy lines more, or the different crazy lines more. And that's part of it. Yeah, he's more experienced there. But sometimes there is also like a lot of, he's just more comfortable making decisions in those circumstances and branching out. And if there's something he's only done once before in practice, I don't think he hesitates and he just does it. If he thinks, oh, I think this will work, I think he just does it. Whereas you think of the extreme end of a macro player. I think of players who I tend to be quite critical as a caster of people who are too defensive. And I know if they've only done something 10 or 15 times in practice, they're like, oh, I'm not doing that in a tournament. No way. It's this, they want things to be something they've practiced so many times. And it's so fascinating to just kind of watch the way Haas has within the strategic side, forced it into almost a completely different game. So I guess what I'm getting at here, and I'm kind of thinking out loud, is there's almost different types of StarCraft within StarCraft, right? That rewards different levels of specialization versus variety and breadth.
That's such a great point too that you make, that there's different types of StarCraft. The differences between our game and chess are so vast. And I remember when Idra was still playing in the MLGs, somebody interviewed him and asked, like, is StarCraft like chess? And he said, no, it's not anything close to chess, in the most Idra, condescending way he could, right? And it's true though that chess is this gentle setting where it's a defined game, and literally, although it seems to humans to be infinite, it's literally a finite game. There's only so many possibilities on the board, although it's a huge number for us. StarCraft, on the other hand, has so much more complexity, and that's why it's so much harder for AI developers to come up with AlphaStar, as opposed to what are we talking 15 years ago, when we had programs that could beat chess players, grandmaster world-class chess players. And I think it's so interesting that you bring that point up, because we see that again and again in StarCraft. And shout out not only to Haas, but Printf and Florencio and all of our boys that love to play the cheesy game, right, and make other players rage. but they have developed a style that is so unique to their own, and that comes from this sort of um, unique play that's not repetitive, right? So that's one of the
Hmm.
things that's really interesting, that it comes up in the book when it's talking about IQ tests and intelligence over time with humans and how that's improved over time. That humans have just gotten better at dealing with the modern world because we have this sort of complexity, and we're able to deal with these unique situations, and we've kind of explored the world differently than maybe somebody who joins a medieval guild and learns to be a blacksmith by, swinging a hammer 10,000 times or a million times or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I love that call out in particular of like StarCraft being kind of both of these two paradigms that are called out in the book, right? Because it almost, I felt, got brought up as like, and here's an example of a wicked learning environment, StarCraft, where you have to come up with all these strategies. And at first, like, even I bought it, right? And it's like, well, I'm, one of the book guys. Like, I I should be uniquely qualified to not screw this up, but I still screwed it up, right? And it wasn't until I was really chewing on that I kind of came to that same concept that you mentioned, Pig, where it's like, well, hold on a minute. Like, the reason that I'm practicing, okay, I've got this one timing that I'm doing in PvT, and that's the mission. We're going to hit this timing. We're going to see where it goes from there, right? Well, it's because I'm practicing that half of the game, right? And that half feels really safe for me because I want to pretend that the whole game is a kind learning environment, and I can just, that'll get you to diamond, right? You make your workers, you're happy, you have a big army, you throw it across the map, you win. And so you kind of hit this wall, right, where you have to start learning the other stuff. But to say that it is only one or the other isn't true. And I think maybe that's an important takeaway here, that the author doesn't quite get perfectly, which is fair. I mean, he's having to cover a lot of ground, right? But yeah, I think it's a really important point to draw, because we're going to move from there to say a lot of things about here's how you should conduct yourself in a wicked learning environment. And these are kind of some of the things that you need to do. It's important to note that only some aspects of StarCraft are, only some of those count as a wicked learning environment. And for all the other ones, all of the chess-like or music-like things apply. Maybe I shouldn't have said music. We'll get to jazz in a little bit here, because that's going to make things weird too. So I guess along these lines, I had a note here about, looking at, actually, this is one of your notes, Seth, about looking at a pro and saying, this is like the Tiger children thing. Like, I want my kids doing the thing the Olympians are doing right now, not what they were doing when they were my kids' age.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you kind of think about that, Seth?
Well, oh man, sometimes you read these books, and we've done now, this is I think our 11th episode. So we've read a number of these books, and I'll read these books and I'll read something and I'm like, that's me, right? And this one hits home. So many times in my life, and not even talking about video games or StarCraft, but so many times in my life, I've looked towards a professional doing that thing, whether it be sports or, some sort of game or whatever it is. And I think, okay, whatever they're doing, that's going to be my practice regimen from now on. And I start doing it, and I don't see the results that I want to see, or I'm not patient enough to wait for the results even.
Mm-hmm.
But it has almost like there's a correlation between where they are now and what you should do as a beginner or as somebody learning is basically zero, right?
Right.
And a lot of these folks have gone through really diverse patterns to get to where they are. And I think the book starts with the example of Tiger Woods, and I forget the tennis player's name, but it's a tennis player that goes up through, how they learned they didn't like this and they did like that, and they tried all these things, and it wasn't until like a late age that they started playing, which most people would say, okay, if you want your kid to be a tennis superstar, they should start at 3 years old,
Right.
barely able to hold the racket. And this is me, I've conventional wisdom is look at somebody that's good and do what they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how many StarCraft players have done this by watching the GSL and saying, well, I'm going to do whatever, MMA does. That's what I'm going to do from now on. And that just might be the worst thing you can possibly do to learn,
I think
Yeah.
that's a very good point. It's Yeah, we'll do exactly what that expert does. And I'm always I do a fair bit of educational content, and I'm always kind of saying, oh, watch pro games. Yeah, be inspired by pro
Mm,
games. Maybe grab a tiny nugget, one little thing they do, but don't try to copy the whole. Don't do that because it doesn't apply. There's too many things you don't understand. It's like there's always these points where I see the meta evolve to a certain point, and I go, whoa, 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 hold on. Everyone's doing this thing that like Cyril does or whatever. And I'm like, no, you guys haven't earned that yet.
right.
I like to talk about the history of, okay, Legacy of the Void, for instance, where in the early days, like if you go watch the VODs from 2016, even late 2015, through that whole year, 2017, then 2018, you see this evolution and these metas shift and ebb and flow. Um, 2017, the year of TY, was the year where we finally saw people say, hey, rather than going 55 to 66 workers max every game for each race, TY figured out how to go 75. And we were like,
Right.
75? Are you crazy, dude? And he'd like, no, I figured out how to defend really well. I will do tactical harassments and move outs, and then I'll move out. And now we've seen in 2020, it's 100 drones or 117 if you're watching earlier today. I think that was a mistake from Raynor, but Raynor especially has been pushing it up. 100 drones for Zerg, and it's like 90 often for Protoss or Terran. And people have figured out how to play these bigger games. But there was years of the pros in the trenches figuring out how to stop the 55 worker timing attacks while being on 62 workers and having that 6 worker advantage,
Right.
7 worker advantage, and figuring out how to navigate there. And there was years of players crashing one baseling Bane into each other before they figured out how to get to roaches safely off the back of that. And there's these layers of learning, and it's not that it's wrong to just play too risky and you have to play all in. But I guess what I'm getting at is that, yep, I think people do need to be inspired. And I look back at the way I used to teach StarCraft, and it used to be a lot of, you know what, you need to just get better macro. Your macro is too bad. You just got to get more stuff. Just follow this build order. That's the main build order. It was a lot of that. And this is what you hear echoed a lot today. And so recently, I've been seeing players of all leagues, but especially kind of gold through low masters, are trying to play this. Just they build a billion workers, and they're making upgrades, and they're macroing harder than I've ever seen anybody macro in all of StarCraft 2 history. And this is throughout the whole population. And I've come to realize, I'm pretty sure Vibe is a big reason for this. His Bronze to GM series is taken off, and he said macro is the most important thing. And when you add that to already, if you ask on any forum, oh, what can I do? Here's my replay. Oh, you don't have enough workers. Make more workers. You need to make more workers. Everybody kind of just vomits out the most basic advice, and some of it's all true. That this is important. You need to have mechanics. You need to have macro for the other things to be important, and that's something you can always work on improving and leveling up. But I kind of feel like we've almost ushered in a wave of StarCraft players who are so specialized on macro. They have taken that skill so far beyond their other skills, where you often get people with tilted skill sets, but it is beyond extreme. It is like exaggerated to this absolutely insane level where people are so. There's people in Gold League I coach every day who have 100 workers, and like they've got 8k minerals, 3k gas in the bank, and even if they're spending the money, their army just always takes the worst possible engagements. There's no understanding of unit composition, tech, upgrades. People are often up 80 supply and just sit there until the opponent catches up and maxes out. And I'm seeing this over and over again. So what I see is people have gone down this one very important, admittedly, probably the most important part of StarCraft. They've specialized in it so much, but they have ignored everything else. And in a game that has as much variety and skill sets as StarCraft, to me, I'm like, it might be the most important skill. It's still only 7% of the game, or like 10% of the game. Like maybe it's 30%, maybe 40% at the very most, if I had to give a number. But it doesn't matter how good you are at that 40%. If your other ones, you're 1 out of 10 on every other skill set. And it's very hard to then go back and learn. Why? I've already sunk so much time into becoming a great macro player. I can't abandon it. If I'm floating 2,000 minerals in a game, that's what I have to fix. I can't possibly focus on taking better engagements better. So everybody is they're like, I'm floating too much money. That's what I'm doing wrong. Everybody is focused on, if I just get good enough macro, everything else will happen. And I think it's so close to being the right approach, because I think building the fundamental skill sets in StarCraft, building those things which require grinding, hopefully getting an early start, being on the right track, I think that's a nice thing to start with. But it has to be then, okay, you have to then force yourself to go play the other areas of the game. And it's hard to figure out, well, what should I focus on? Because the game is so vast. And what do you look at in this game? And I think this is another aspect of range within StarCraft. It's not just two extreme ends, there's many layers in between. And that's why I think one of the most useful things for players is like putting blinders on to focus on one area of the game, just to make it a little bit of a kinder environment. And this is kind of changing what kind environment means, but stick with me for a moment. So if you say, I am only going to make roaches, I'm not allowed to make any other unit, that is going to force you to get really good with roaches, right? If I'm only going to make marines and medevacs, I'm going to have to learn how to do and do some multi-drops and stuff. And it's going to have simple macro. Macro is still important with that, but you're going to be kind of cutting off its importance at a certain point where you're trying to shift your focus into a certain unit set. And there's 1,000 ways you can make that challenge work. I'm never allowed to go Hive as Zerg. I always try to make sure I commit really super hard to my 1-1 push as Terran versus Protoss, because I too often miss that moment in the game. And even though my macro is good, I'm missing too many opportunities. I'm going to force myself, even when I'm afraid, even when I doubt myself, to commit to that attack. And suddenly your wins or losses become more compact, and you can learn more from them, right? Because you've kind of narrowed your blinders down to this less crazy, wild environment. So I feel like within individual learning of StarCraft, there are certain skills which it's very tempting to just grind and grind and grind forever. And I think a little bit of practice focus to it is good. But I think it's been taken way too far by a ton of players in the player base. And as a result, I look at the way they're playing and I go, this isn't going to be fun in the long run. This is going to be demotivating and boring, because they're so out of their depth in many elements in the game. Right. So I think a lot of players could try to rein it back, and they need to kind of force themselves, rather than just sticking with this incredibly simple chessboard-like environment of, if I make 80 drones quick enough, I'll win. Force yourself off the chessboard after 30 workers, after 40 walkers. Get out there and engage in this crazy 3D physics of these maps with so many different unit compositions and fights that can happen. So I guess that's my kind of rant about the player base. I would love to see force themselves out of their comfort zone constantly, and I think that's an important part of learning.
Yeah, I love this so much. So I felt like, as you're saying that, raising my hand and going, yes, I'm this. I am one of these children of the macro advice. And really it's true. I mean, I started my stream having watched so many streamers, right? So I sat there in the church of macro listening to these sermons, and got indoctrinated and said, okay, if that's the way everybody says to do it, I'm going to do it. I'm starting off in bronze. We're going to follow the journey, whatever. And the thing about it that is such a trap that I think makes so many people fall into this is like, Vibe and everybody else, preaching this stuff isn't wrong. Like, if I do just get a bunch of money, get a bunch of workers, a bunch of bases, and spend it and move it across the map, yeah, you get better really, really, really quick. Chat is already blowing up about me cannon rushing. We're going to get there. Hold on. I'm going to have a big old rant. All right. So I mean, truly, like, I did this and I got to, I think I got to low diamond. And it was like steady, up and to the right, nice looking graph, right? I'm like, month after month, I'm getting better. And then what happens? Exactly what Pig just said, right? I'm moving armies through chokes, up ramps, into concaves, spellcasters, it's like, and streaming it too, right? So chat is flipping out at me now. Oh my God, you were up 80 supply. How did you lose? And I'm just never hearing the end of it, right? So lo and behold, H. Jax, a Grandmaster North American Protoss, he picks me up out of the gutter somewhere and says, all right, kid, here, let me learn you something, right? He gets in Discord, starts, bossing me around. Lo and behold, I shoot up a rank like overnight, right? It literally just on not taking stupid fights anymore. But then we get into this thing where, okay, but I can't control my army at all. Okay, well now, Z Daddy, here's your cannon rushing. In comes Printf, H. Jax's college roommate. Says, I have a tool for you to force every game into a game where you need to control your units very, very precisely, right? So I start opening, cannons into double robo against Zergs. I'm picking immortals in and out of prisms. All of a sudden I can do it, right? And I'm getting compliments in my chat. Wow, for a Diamond League player, your prism control's pretty good. Okay, well, I was able to make it look like that kind learning environment. Every game I was playing, there's shit flying in and out of a prism, right? And I'm blinking stuff and whatever. It's like, most people at my level don't have experience with that. But now I'm stuck. And I'm stuck because I did, again, exactly what Pig described. It's like, sure, the macro's pretty good, right? And everything else is a 1. And I was able to fix a few of those things. I don't take horrible fights anymore. My control isn't garbage with certain units. But, like, my scouting's really bad. I feel really nervous anytime I have to go try to get information. I never know what my opponent's doing. I don't know how to predict off of what I do see or don't see what else might be present. Okay, the army's here, it can't be there, these kinds of things. You see this tech, the Zerg is on all links. Oh, must be mutas. Just all of these different little things where it's like you see one thing, it means something else. It literally doesn't exist in my brain. Like, there are units that I have used maybe once or twice. Like, I other than like cannon rushing and PvPs, I've pretty much never used a Void Ray. I've been playing for years. Never really used a Void Ray, So it's interesting because it does work, right? This macro thing does work, and you can make it into a kind learning environment, but you do end up stuck in exactly the way he's describing, and I don't know really how you back out of that. I don't know how to teach myself to start doing these things. How do I get comfortable multitasking with a unit that I might lose? I don't want to lose an adept across them. I'm going to look stupid in front of Twitch chat. I can't do that.
Well, this is so interesting because this all resonates so much with me, and it was especially the chapter about dropping your tools towards the end of the book, which was very powerful for me, where they talk about, as always, he talks about such different examples, which I love. But the first one that the author gives there, of course, is firefighters who, whenever the fire turns on them, won't drop their packs and their tools, even when they're ordered to. And unfortunately, many of the deaths, whenever the wind suddenly changes or, they get trapped in a burning building, their commanders are telling them, drop your tools and run. And often when they've done the investigations after, they usually would have made it away if they dropped their tools.
Right.
But they do the investigation. They've all got this giant heavy pack on their back, a big chainsaw in their hand. And they've run a few hundred meters like that, where they could have sprinted twice as fast if they, and got out of there. And it's this weird phenomena where in a lot of industries, there is a culture of, this is your, this is how we do things. This is your tool set. This is what makes you useful. It becomes part of your identity.
Right.
You're a cannon rusher now, or you're a macro player, or,
right.
Hey, I play Stalker Colossus. That's what I do. It's like, okay, yeah, but like his Vipers keep abducting your Colossus. Like, why don't you try making Archon Storm instead? And you're like, I'm not going to drop the thing I'm good at. Like, do you? And it makes sense as well.
Yeah,
like, I've put so much time in getting good at this unit composition. And in the last couple of years, playing random and trying to be less competitive and explore more things and not be as results driven, I think I've evolved a lot as a player, because there have been times where I'm like, all right, I'm going to actually put down this thing that I've put so much time into, and I'm going to start using ghosts. All right, I'm going to start using ghosts. For ages, it's too hard to use ghosts with bio. There's too much I'm already screwing up. I'm not good enough at these other things. I need to get more perfect with those before I can use the other thing. And I mean, a little bit of that rewards me at times, where sticking with the thing, even when it's not working, putting in the grind to get better at it. But there is a point where there's diminishing returns. And it's like, no, you've got to go sideways and learn a new skill set, drop 500 MMR, build that back up. Step sideways again. Okay, we're learning mech now. Okay, bam. And you're sitting there, if you just look at your MMR graph, you're like, well, this is really demotivating. It's like, it's up and down, and it might even be on a downwards trajectory overall, but you're actually becoming a better player because you're learning more skills and you are actually becoming a stronger player. And for me, for instance, I suddenly was able to do that a bit more when it wasn't just about winning or losing, but it was about understanding the game better so I can commentate better, about teaching better, about creating more interesting content. So for me, took a bit of my ego out of it, a bit. I'm still very egotistical as a very competitive person. And suddenly I was able to I could take away, okay, all right, I can take a little chance on this and I can develop this other skill set. All right, I'll start using Neural Parasite with Burrowed Infestors. Okay, I'll learn this new hotkey for turning auto repair on and off rather than right clicking on the command card, which a lot of pros still do. A lot of pros still do that. And I make fun of them for it now because I went through the same thing a year ago where I finally, it's just Alt R. It's not that hard. Just press Alt R. The number of times people lose their bunker because they've misclicked the auto repair. But yeah, so back to the point. Sorry, rambling as always. It's very much just that thing where it's so hard to put down the thing you've put so much time into, and you identify as that sort of player. And like I was literally thinking about this in the shower last night, and this chapter, and I was going to be talking to you guys, and I was thinking about someone being like, "Why don't you just do this?" in my chat. I can't remember what the exact situation was, but I remember I got like really worked up because I've just had a hard loss, and I'm like. Come on, man. Like, okay, well, I'm a gladiator. I'm an expert swordsman. You're asking, why don't you just use the spear? The spear's better versus the guy on the horse. I'm like, I don't know how to use the spear. I've used a sword my whole life. I can't just pick up the spear and fight a guy with it. I'll lose. But that's kind of the mental trap you fall into. It's like, well, yeah, so what? You'll lose a few games, then you'll figure out how to learn to use the spear, and you'll actually become better at it. And it's like, oh, man, it's so hard to throw away what you feel you have a higher chance of success with, even when there are situations where a pro gamer or a very high level player finally puts down their tools, picks up a new one, and you know what they always say? Oh my God, I can't believe I didn't do this sooner. Within a week of practice, I was already doing better in these situations because this tool, this composition, or this unit was so much better suited to the situation. A lot of the time with mechanics, I think of Petite Drogo saying, dude, I thought this rapid fire thing, like, it just wasn't that important. And I don't need that. I have a way of doing it. It'll just mess with my muscle memory. And then he like learned it and he was like, oh, like I remember him literally just warping in units. He's like, I'm an idiot. Why wasn't I doing this? I can just hold down a key and 12 zealots warp in. And he was so funny about it because Drogo is such a funny guy. And he always, he makes fun of how silly he gets competitively, like we all do. But yeah, it's there's so many mental traps there, man. It's so funny.
Such great discussion that you both have brought up, and I think that sort of the church of macro, which we've in the community we've like grown to appreciate, is definitely a sunken cost fallacy, and you've identified it several times, Pig. This not dropping your tools, the firefighter analogy here. It's the sunken cost fallacy. You put this time in, and you feel like if I'm not using the thing that I put all the time in, what's the purpose? What am I doing with my life? And we feel this way in all aspects of life. I have, at least. It doesn't matter if it's your professional work or if it's a video game. When you get good at something through time, you feel like that's what you should do, and you're obligated to use that. And it's not really true, right? And I know my friend Florencio recently started learning hotkeys. And it's interesting, right? Because he got some hate for this. That people are calling him names and calling him out, and because he's played a certain way for so long. And watch any one of the Florencio files, which are hilarious, right? And you see that he didn't need to have hotkeys to win most of those games, right? He just does weird stuff, and that really works. But okay, so here's somebody who's bucking the trend and going off and learning the hotkeys, and that will benefit in the long run. Like, and we talked about this last time with tacit knowledge, and I gave the example of learning camera locations that unequivocally will benefit your gameplay, but it's a hard thing to do if you've never used them before. It feels awful because you're going to lose games, and losing games feels bad, and it's difficult, and difficult stuff feels bad. It comes back to that desirable difficulty. When we have things that are hard to do, we learn the best, but boy, we don't like it. It's just a human response.
Right. God, I have a serious point, but you got me on the Florencio thread, so I'm gonna go there first, and then I'll reel it in. I remember throwing back drinks with Florencio at BlizzCon 3 years ago. This is before I interviewed him. And I was asking him about this, right? It was actually this night of chatting and drinking was what turned into the interview. I'm like, can we just have this conversation again? This was freaking fascinating. He was down to do it. But I was like, man, like what's the deal with the no hotkeys thing? And he goes, yeah, I'll learn them someday. I want to see what the game's like without it. And I'm like, Flo, you're drunk, you're talking shit, there's no way, right? Fast forward 3 years, I see him, he's got a Photoshop document of his mouse layout. I'm like, wow, he sure showed me, But okay, on a serious note though, the book talks about this notion of like the short-term reward thing, the stick with what you know. And I thought that was so interesting because there's the context that we just sort of spoke about it in, which, you know, I agree with everything you both said. There's also the idea that doing that makes it harder to uncover rules, right? So to sort of create these abstractions out of your experiences and go, oh, okay, there are some similar patterns that different things fall into from these specific experiences that I'm seeing. There's that study where the participants had like a board with a bunch of light bulbs, and you have to kind of like press these different inputs and the light will sort of move. And if you move the light from one corner to the other, then you get like $5 or whatever. And what they found was the participants in this study, right, they'll find one way to get a reward and they'll do it over and over and over and over again. Give me $3, give me $3, give me $3. And maybe never uncover that there are actually, you know, some additional ways you can do it. You can abstract out these rules and you could have been making more money quicker, but you weren't because you were so stuck on like, hey, I can get $3 over and over and over if I work through this giant maze. Never mind the fact that there were, you know, there was a 3 input sequence that would get you more money quicker. So, you know, that definitely stuck with me as I'm thinking again, you know, self-critically, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing these all-ins. Maybe I need to, you know, listen to vibe and I got to learn all the different ways to get to 200 supply and, you know, all this stuff. But, you know, I think there are, it's sort of what you said, Pig, about placing emphasis on different things and learning each piece of the game, and that, you know, maybe you need some of each, right? Maybe you need to kind of round yourself out as a player in that way. Like certain strategies will build up different skill sets.
Yeah, I think there's so many little areas it's easy to ignore, and it just becomes, oh, that's something I'm not good at, so I don't do, and you don't even look at them critically. You just think, yeah, we'll do the thing that I'm good at. You know, it's such a human thing to, you know, desirable difficulty, pick the thing that works, pick the thing that's easy, or that you identify as, hey, I'm good at this thing. Like, yeah, you know, how many people get good at things or choose career paths or fall into things because someone tells them they're good at it? They meet some early success, whether through chance or actually being gifted or whatever. And then you're like, oh, I'm good at this thing. I'm motivated to keep working at it. Like, cool. And it's cool because that's motivating, but it's also, yeah, potentially something you can get too attached to. And that's why that painful process of, I think separating your attachment to things and fighting against that fear of moving away from, you know, everything that is comfortable and known out into the unknown. It's a powerful thing for learning in general. And I think about so many little mini times I've had this just as a StarCraft player over the last couple of years where I'm like, there'd just be so many times where I'd have that, no, like I just need to focus on this like one thing. I need to make the environment as simple as possible, where there's just one detail that I already know quite well. And if I just do it a little bit better, it'll solve the issue. And like there'd be times where I'm playing against someone who is so much better than me. You know, I'm not an active competitor anymore. I compete for fun, and I'm playing against a top pro gamer, and I'm like, yeah, if I just hit my, you know, quick third into 2-2, blah, blah, like real defensive, reactive things against someone who's 1,000 MMR better than you. These are unwise strategic choices, because you're saying I will execute to a ridiculous mechanical level. I will be so fast. I will be so quick. I will be scouting and reacting on the fly and doing all this. And a lot of the time you just die to their first attack. You just get knocked out because it's a little bit harder and faster than you're used to. You're a few seconds behind on things because you hit a little supply block. And then I've recently kind of gone, wait a second, what am I doing with this? Like, why am I playing like this? And yeah, a lot of it is, well, if I start working on those things, it's, you know, it's just starting from scratch every little time. And it's so much more comfortable to try to get from 90% to 100% at something, even though it's this, you're pushing a boulder up a mountain, just because you know that path and you're so quick to identify, this was the bit I need to do better, even though it's so, you need to do 10,000 push-ups to make that 1% difference. Your natural instinct, or at least mine, was to do that rather than, how about I just, okay, rather than saying I can't micro 3 places at once, why don't I just try? Why? I'd just be like, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. If there's fighting 3 players, like I need to just smash my main army into this choke point and break them there. And to the outside view, and this is where having the lovely all-knowing eye of Twitch chat is actually helpful. It's when like 3 days later, there's a game replaying in my mind, and there's like the one guy's like, if you didn't attack there and like defended that, like you were actually ahead against that guy who is infinitely better than you. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I couldn't have been better like ahead versus him. And then I think back in the game, and I'm like, I was ahead, wasn't I? But I felt like I needed to force things just using this very narrow kind of blinders on focus, which is great for practice and for improving certain skills. But when it comes to competition, you need to throw that away. And this is where I think some players thrive at a pro level, and others who are insanely good practice partners sometimes fail as they take the practice mindset into tournaments. They're trying to put their blinders on, focus on such a narrow skill set. And in an adversarial game where your opponent can predict what you're going to do in StarCraft, it's just not a good way to play. There's too many ways that can mess up what you're doing while cutting corners themselves and then just kill you in the most one-sided fashion ever. How many times do we see the rank 50 or 30 pro gamer get ruffle stomped by a top 10 player?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, well, this guy's bad. And I'm like, you guys don't understand. He's the 50th best player in the world. That guy is so insanely good.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, I do think it's because that rank 50 player, those players who are very good but can't quite break through in terms of consistency. Not always. Sometimes there is a speed factor, other things. But I think a lot of the time it's because they don't expand that range of what they're good at. They're in this mindset of, well, I'm not as good as these guys, so I need to double down on what I'm good at. But that's actually like the mental trap that I think a lot of players fall into, where it's like, no, like you gotta be willing to wade out into the wild waters. Why am I so impressed by Clem as a player? It's because he has 36 build orders for every matchup, and he has for a few years. I'm watching him play best of 5 after best of 5, different players of the same race, 10 different build orders over 10 games. I'm like, what the hell? Terran players are meant to have like 1, 2 build order, maybe 3 build order variations for each matchup. And the modern Terrans, oh, no. Why? Part of why Terran's doing so well, everyone's like, oh, TY has a billion different builds. I guess we should do that as well.
Yeah.
And I think there's this thing where players have started to realize at the tip top level, yeah, you focus on those narrow things, you put your blinders on, you try to expert at a skill set. But when it comes to tournaments, you got to take that off and you got to start, will it take risks, counter your opponent, have a wild range of things, which if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can know what your opponent's doing, predict it, and your way of taking advantage of that is to get a 1 probe advantage rather than just winning the game. Haas will fucking win the game. If he knows what you're going to do, he will kill you. Almost always. If he can predict what you're going to do. And then there's these opposite end of players like, wow, I can get my third down 12 seconds faster if I know he's going to do that. And I'm like, this is not bad what you're doing, but it's not taking advantage as much as it possibly could be.
It's not optimal. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess to wrap that up, to bring it back to my own experience, I started doing a lot of wild cheeses and playing random and not telling my race in tournaments, which obviously gives an advantage. Turns out telling my race to players who are 1500 MMR higher than me, so they could play their perfect build order when I didn't even know what matchup I was getting till the map was literally in there. It turns out that was a pretty bad idea. And then suddenly I'm beating, taking maps off pro gamers again, and I'm beating them on the ladder every now and then. And I'm going, oh. And I mean, it's a necessary push and pull to focus hard on the details for a while. But it's been such a stark reminder for me where I was just getting bodied every time I played a pro in a tournament. And now I can always at least navigate the first 7-8 minutes really well and often get ahead. And I'm like, oh shit, I just needed to like loosen up and try more things. And yes, I still will have focused practice on certain skills, but I've got to like just embrace a wider range of StarCraft and be comfortable with that, because I was actually putting myself into really terrible situations by being so obsessed with only playing in that comfort zone, that very narrow comfort zone.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up TY. I think Aaron and I are going to have to start a second podcast to just do the TY fan club, because he comes up literally every time we talk about knowledge and learning. He's such a great example of breadth of knowledge. And you see it in the GSL. And I remember recently, Tastosis was casting a game of his, and they were talking about going into battle cruisers. And they were saying that how TY would definitely have an advantage because he's one of the few Terrans that actually took that meta seriously and practiced different varieties of it. And, he's a great example of what we're talking about in terms of range. Now, he's done a lot of StarCraft in his life, right?
Right.
From a
Yeah.
very young age. But he takes StarCraft and turns it on its head many times over. And I think that's really interesting. And in the book, it comes kind of the proof of concept is that, problem solvers in general are better if they have this breadth of knowledge, rather than trying to use these memorized repetitive procedures. So, if you get into a game where you're playing somebody that's much, much better, there's a very, very slim chance that you're going to out macro them if they're doing the same kind of build order. It's highly unlikely. And so expanding your brain to have a better breadth of knowledge will actually, you'll end up getting more out of a competition with somebody that's better than you if you do something different and you just relax, like you're saying,
Right.
if don't get so tense and worry about winning here, worry about learning. I think that's such an important thing that we forget as StarCraft players.
And an interesting point, because you mentioned that like Ty, he's been playing for so long. An interesting conspiracy theory that I dabble in, the StarCraft conspiracy theory, is it's Kesper that was holding him back, right? Because
Mm.
right when Kesper, his team disbanded, he went and was living in an apartment on his own for the first time. As a little kid, he was living in a team house. The coach was telling him kind of what builds to play. And I'm sure there was some freedom there, but there was also pretty strict hours of practice. And you're always trying to just do the standard builds so that you're good practice for the top players on the team. And then he came out of that, and it was like a few months later, bam, we had the $400,000 in 2 months or whatever it was. Like
Yeah.
TY 2017 was just off the charts. So it's funny because like I like to indulge in this fantasy, and I've got to get a translator to ask him one day. We'll see. I'm like, is it, was it just he relaxed more? He tried different things. Did he seems like he just suddenly came into his own when he was out of that environment, which forced him into a narrow mindset. So I don't know. I like that little fanfic in my own brain that Ty kind of broke out and became his own player.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah, I love that. So, okay, as soon as you said TY, I went off to my own little pet thing about him, right? Which is like the tactical brilliance, right? Where it's I don't even almost know how to describe it, right? But it's like he's looking at the game, and this instantaneous calculation happens in his head, and he goes, "Oh no, actually, you're completely dead. Here, let me show you." Right? And it's this like you just see him drop the hammer time and time again in these different weird scenarios where like any other Terran is like, yeah, okay, cool. I killed 2 SCVs. Let me go home and I'm just gonna chill or whatever and be a little bit ahead of you. He's like, no, actually, you're dead. Your army is positioned just very slightly wrong, and now I'm in your base, doom dropping you, and it's over, right? And this makes me think of the sort of like, this isn't miraculous in the book. They talk about this idea of chunking, right? And you both kind of touched on this concept of like exposure to enough of these situations kind of loads in your head this pattern recognition that it seems miraculous. It seems like, oh wow, how smart, how quick is his brain that he was able to crunch the numbers and know a medevac moves at such and such a speed and it's at this angle. No, he had this intuitive gut feeling that you were dead and the balls to drop the hammer on you, right? And it kind of makes me wonder, right? Because, we've been talking about this concept back and forth of like, some aspects of StarCraft are kind, some of them are wicked. And I sort of want it makes it vague for me again, right? Like, clearly something like that, you really have to just have exposure to lots of situations like TY clearly does. But it makes it so murky for me. And I'm curious to hear like what you each think. Like, how do you untangle the wicked from the kind when you're looking at all these different, facets of the game?
Yeah, I would say Pig has he took the torch from day 9, right? You carried the torch. We had the fun day Monday, and you said it earlier, right? So I'm just gonna give you all the credit for this. That if you give yourself some hard limits, right? So I'm only gonna go to hive and or not gonna go to hive and only gonna make roaches or whatever, or you go and I'm only gonna make blink stalkers, whatever it is. You give yourself those limits, and you can you can simplify the game into something that's a little bit more
Mm.
gentle. And the icy far, right? Like this, the fun day Monday became the icy far, and Pig took this over and encouraged people to say, okay, do something weird, right? And inadvertently, whether I don't know if you knew it or not, you can tell us or maybe keep it a secret. I don't know, but inadvertently, you created a learning environment for
Mm.
people to take that wicked game, simplify it down. I don't have to worry about the upgrades of Hive anymore because I'm only going to build roaches. And that makes it easier for me to learn what's the dynamic situation I can get into with this unit, right? This unit that's really good actually in a lot of situations, but it's also really bad in a lot of situations.
I mean, that's it. It's that you can develop that cool environment. That's one of the things I kind of realized at some point into IC4 where I was like trying to encourage people, because some weeks we'd have really low submissions, hadn't really talked about it, and I'd be like, come on guys, get your replays in. Super fun challenge. Remember, even if you're low level, it doesn't matter. We've had Harstem send in replays. We've had Bronzies who've literally barely played the game send in replays. It's not about skill. And then there'd be other times people be like, oh, but look, this challenge just sounds too hard for my race. I go, trust me, like this is just use this. Don't care about winning or losing. Choose unranked, have a different account, whatever you do. You might actually find you sometimes even get better. Like especially I'd have like challenges where it was like, oh, you can't go past 30 or 35 workers or something like that. And I was like, you guys don't know it. This is actually just like the best practice for a lot of people out there. Like this is going to force you to just get good at your micro, focus on those little details. And yeah, it's such a powerful tool to do that. I always like to liken it to regular sports and stuff because it's such a vast, complicated game where I'm like, okay, yeah, it is, but like, so cool. Let's make it a little bit more bite-sized. Let's shadowbox, let's spar. Like, I think of the early days of Wings of Liberty, and like, man, just like Zergling Banelings versus Zergling Banelings on one base. That's all Zerg versus Zerg was for the first year of StarCraft 2. And I remember like with another friend just who I'd met on the ladder, and we were like, dude, I suck at this. He's like, yeah, this shit's crazy. Like, I don't know who's gonna win. We're just running Banelings into each other and stuff's wild. And so we'd just play like hours of just one base Zergling Baneling versus one base Zergling Baneling. And even if you'd bank, because we're so bad at injecting and stuff, we'd be banking all this minerals, but the rule was you can't expand. You just have to kill them with one baseling Bane. And sometimes we couldn't kill each other, which was fine because we're just, bam, it's all Ling Bane micro. And it was like, we were so frustrated by this matchup, but we also really wanted to get better at the game. And we were like, I guess we just do this. And in hindsight, I'm like, shit, man, I wish I did more of that across more situations when I was developing as a player, because that's so useful. And I think you can definitely try to, if you wanted to take, let's go actionable points on this. You can try to make the game a little kinder that way. In terms of, you're still going to encounter a ridiculous number of situations. When it comes to the, I'm not sure what the terms is, like the tactical engagements, it's almost like the tactics of the situations are so diverse because the map pool change, the maps are all different, the unit sets are all different. There are big things which just change a situation, right? Running up this ramp equals win. Wait, there was one sentry that drops 2 force fields in the middle of my army. That is now lose, right? There are so many rules that turn things upside down. There's already, you can simplify it as much as you want. It's still an incredibly unkind, wicked environment. There's too many situations, right? So I think that's one thing is, okay, make that side of the game a little bit more simplified by at least not worrying about too many things, so you can focus all your brain power on like absorbing and understanding and starting to recognize patterns. But then I think on the other side, it's, do think about your base skill set that you need to specialize in. I need to get good at my macro cycle and injecting my hatcheries. Man, I never use chrono boost. I got to get better at chrono boosting. I got to get my probes up. I think see that as a skill set. I think, and I just want to reiterate, I love Vibe. I think Vibe series is the best thing for a lot of players out there. It's amazing, but it's a tool. It's not the everything. That's the only thing. Too many people have taken it as the everything. They're like, oh, well, he got to bronze to GM using it. I'll go to GM. And I'm like, no, you're in Platinum League. Stop branching out, please. You've already gone far enough with like just building 100 workers. So work on that skill set, but maybe stop it a bit lower. Maybe just don't go as extreme. I still think you can learn how to macro and learn how to do a really all-in timing attack, and you can do it in the exact same game, because you can macro your ass off to 50 workers or 55 workers, and you can hit a sick timing attack off that. And I think there's newbie players out there who go, no, but I see pros, 55 pro workers is nothing. Go watch 2016 StarCraft 2. It's a giant economy for the top pro gamers in the world. The best players in the world you're watching now, they weren't going past 66 workers very often. A lot of the time, I remember Innovation had like 6 months where he didn't build a third command center because he figured out that with the way the minerals worked, he could just lift his main to his third and continue doing a 2-base all in and have like a 4th wave of 2-base all in here, and he kept killing people with it. Like, I think pro gamers had to spend years in that environment playing full time. Let's all be a bit more realistic about our skill set and do the same thing. We can focus on that skill set, but if you can cut off those strictly defined, super detailed mechanics of just build workers, just build stuff, and trying to force yourself in the second half of a game into that dynamic environment, you automatically will improve as a player. Force yourself to engage in tactical situations, in attacks, in very, very wildly diverse conditions and situations, because the more you do that, the more you strip away any fear of the unknown. Because every time you're committing to an attack in StarCraft, you don't know if there's another tank, you don't know if there's a few more force fields or storms just kicked in. There's always a chance you're going to get your ass kicked. But it's part of this whole package of choose units that you think are really cool and inspire you. That's the follow your nose aspect. Man, I love mutas and I love the way Cyril uses them. Learn how to do that, and follow it, and throw some games away with terrible overcommitments with those mutas on your path to learning. If you don't do that, you're not going to learn what's the right way to use them. You're going to be so afraid you're going to miss opportunities. So for anyone out there who's too heavily on that macro side of focus, that's kind of my continued rant 2.0 about make the game more fun for yourself and improve at the same time.
Yeah, love that so much. And I'm glad you set the record straight on the vibe thing too. I didn't mean to come across as vibe has been so cool and helpful to me over the years. It's we're not saying it's a bad tool. It's a fantastic tool at grinding a specific skill, and it's not the only skill you need, right? And I think sometimes it's difficult, especially as a higher level player, to see, what are all of the components that make me good, right? Like it's almost like you have to go back through the motions or find somebody who is going through the motions of like what it's like to be a scrub, so you remember all the things that you've so thoroughly internalized, right? And I love the sort of like follow your nose, like passion based approach that you're advocating, Pig. Like I've very recently actually lived that. So before this stopped me from gaming, I was really struggling in PvT. And I saw GSL Season 2, I think, of this year, Prince versus Maru. He does this over-the-top, super, super sick timing right as Maru's medevacs are halfway across the map. And I'm thinking, oh my god. I can warp charge slots into my base and make them decide whether the Widow Mines need to go forward or come home? Every game? That's when the timing hits? I have to make them do that mental gymnastics? Oh, I'm so in! And all of a sudden, this matchup that I hated and feared is so fun for me because I get to turn it into this messy, chaotic, horrible thing for them every single time. And I'm controlling units that largely I kind of suck with. I'm an adept guy. I'm not a charge lot guy. And watching those little bastards zoom around, I'm like, how do I get you to do something smart? Oh my god! I just stop. Why are you attacking a supply depot, right? And getting to like kind of have some locus of control in that matchup and work on units that I don't really know that well. And it's like I was inspired by this match of GSL that I watched. Like, this is how we got to be learning, man. Like, go see something that you think is cool and get out the Artosis notepad and scribble some notes on what you think you saw in the VOD and learn how to do it. It's so fun. That didn't have anything to do with the book. I'm sorry. You got me hyped up.
No, it's all the same theme. It's all connected. I mean, this is one of those wide. Well, it's a wide-ranging topic. Yeah, of course, it's called range. But it is. It's like it's an all-encompassing topic, right? This is something that affects so many areas of life and science and career development and personal development. It's a wide-ranging thing. It's about learning at its core in many ways and developing who we are as people and how we operate. So I mean, it's follow your nose, dude. Inspiration. It was TLO who changed my mindset on that. I mentioned earlier I used to be teaching more like Vibe does. It's just macro, really hit those basics home. And I remember it was TLO who made this lovely blog post about how he loves this people teaching StarCraft. He thinks it's great, being the absolute diplomat and gentleman that TLO is. And then goes into the criticism of saying, look, everybody, can we stop just telling people to macro? Can we stop just telling people to build more stuff? I don't think it's fun to just build a big army and smush it across the map. He's like, do you think, if you guys know who I am as a player, do you think I ever enjoyed doing that? Hells no, I still don't. He says, go do a proxy hatch and build some spine crawlers in your opponent's base. He said, get a baneling drop going if you've never tried it. And you know what? Oh, I'm not good enough to do that. He says, that's fine. Do it on one base. If you're not good enough to do it on one base. Like anyone's good enough to do anything on one base. Like it won't always work, but you'll get to it and you'll get to execute it. And he was just like, he was like, be creative. If you find out about a cool mechanic, do anything to use that mechanic so you can feel proud and excited. And like, it was this real passion focused, motivational kind of little post about play StarCraft the way you want to. And that's actually the best way to learn. And that's the best way to improve. And that was like just a real bam moment where a light bulb turned on in my brain. I was like, yeah, I have had students where I'm like, no, just build more drones. And I'm like, really? Is that going to motivate that guy in Silver League to get better? Just build more workers? I'm like, Jesus, like, did I learn the game that way? Hells no. I think back to when I was early game, I was trying to become a pro gamer and I knew nothing about RTS. I'd played them growing up. I never played competitively. I played a bit of Warcraft 3 ladder. I was a noob. What do I think back? My favorite games that still stick in my head to this day, I saw a Brood War match of Jelizerg drone drill through the Zealot in the wall and kill it from behind while Zergling rushing. So I did it and I beat a bunch of like pro gamers and semi-pros in tournaments when I was terrible compared to them. And I was like, oh, like this is such a silly build. It was so much fun. And then I saw someone else do Hydra drops and I was Hydra dropping every game for like a few weeks. And I'm like, yeah, that's actually how I improved. And I remember all the guys in my region who'd been Brood War, like competitive players, like I beat them in tournaments and they'd just be like, yeah, you fucking piece of shit. You're so bad. You got, oh my God. I opened the replay. You had 3,000 minerals, you fucking noob. And I'd just be like, dude, you lost to me, man.
Yeah.
I might have had 3,000 minerals. You died to Hydras in your mineral line. Get out. Like, and I just didn't care. And these guys who came from this, like, they were deep in that mindset of, no, you need good macro. You got to spend your money. Your inject energy is too high on your queens. Like they had this real, you got to focus on those skills first. How dare you be beating us while not having focused on those skills?
Right.
And it was hilarious. So I think like when I cast my mind back, I was like, oh shit, I'm actually teaching people to learn the game differently to how I learned it. And that's not something I want to do. I'd much rather people find their own path. And a lot of people in coaching to this day are like, what's the best way to beat Terran? And I'm like, oh, sorry, but we're going to get philosophical now about learning and how you need to think something's cool and you need to be motivated to do that thing. And then I'll help you with that. But I'm not going to tell you how to play the game because I just don't think it's going to lead to you enjoying it in the long term. And it's like, it's just not going to be fruitful for you as a player. So I'm like, I want you to pick something you think is cool. I don't care if you think it's out of your league, just what you think is cool, what you would feel very proud of to do. It's the same thing if you're teaching someone guitar. You don't just be like, we're going to learn just the chords now. We're just learning the chords, learn how to read the music. No, you go, oh, you want to play, what's a simple song that we can play just the chorus of? That's going to be the initial goal because we want you to have some markers on the way to go, oh, I'm proud of this achievement. And if you're just trying to learn a skills-based approach, only building workers or only doing X or Y, and it's something motivated from outside of you, it's just not satisfying when you hit that goal. And it's like what you were saying, Adroseth, where it's like you're copying what someone at the top does. And how are you possibly going to have the patience to follow through on that? Because you're not hitting your own goals along the way. You're like, well, 3 years from now, if I stick with this, like I will hit some real proud goals. It's hard to get there, man.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I want to take a minute though. I just want to point out, we all know TLO, he's so creative. And it's that sort of creativity, it's the meme, right? But it's that sort of creativity that makes him and other players who do that more equipped for more different variety of games, right? You do like a proxy hatch, you'll know what happens in a proxy hatch game. And it's an important skill set to develop. And it's sort of goes along into this improvisation and learning to just enjoy the game. And like you said, with guitar, if you pick up the guitar and somebody tells you you're going to learn every note on the fretboard first before you play a song, you'll never learn guitar. I don't know if Rayner's path to StarCraft was like that, but I'm going to imagine that since his dad was involved in getting him into StarCraft, I'm going to imagine his dad sat him down and said, let's have fun with the game. because if he wasn't having fun, I doubt he'd be a pro now. And humans learn just from trial and error. It's this baby analogy that it's brought up in this book and in other books, that you have to get out there and just try and just see what you like, and don't worry about that somebody who played Brood War that has a much more mechanical and macro based way of playing says that's the way it has to be, because it doesn't. And you'll learn more if you're having fun and you're actually applying this kind of open-ended approach to the game.
It's harder to do that piece of it, to teach somebody the have fun, especially after you've beaten the fun out of it by saying, hey, you need to get to 66 workers on these 3 bases by this time, and you need to take your 3rd base at this time, or you're bad. You're a bad person if you can't do it, right? It's so difficult to reverse. It's so damaging if you don't do it.
Mhm.
I want to, we've been going for a while here. I want to sneak one more topic in, because I think, maybe 2, but this is like my little pet one. I think it's fascinating, particularly for the point in time that we're at, not just with StarCraft, but with RTS in general. So there's this topic in the book of advanced chess tournaments, right? What we mean by this is there is a chess AI that has its own ideas about how to play and what moves are good and what things we want to do. And then there's also a human, and these two form a team, and they play in a tournament against other similar teams. And what they saw when they had these tournaments is that actually the strategic players, i.e. the ones with very long running vision of like the overall way they want to navigate the game, end up being better. And these are not players that were like top 1, 2, 3 in the world. These are people who were, kind of the jobbers of the GSL. They're the ones that get knocked out in the early rounds of the tournament. They're like good, but they're not as good as some of the others, right? So this immediately for me drew a parallel to overall RTS game design. So what the book describes this AI is doing is getting rid of some of the tactics. Now, tactics in chess means something kind of weird. It basically means memorization of certain patterns and different board states in a way that feels very fluid. And this is almost kind of like your mechanics to me in RTS, right? It's like the slapping on the keyboard of like, okay, 4SD, whatever, chrono boost these bases, it's your little macro loop thing. And that immediately made me think of like Brood War versus StarCraft 2, right? We have one game that places a very, very, very heavy emphasis on the mechanical, just like you got to fight the user interface, man. You got to really make these workers like actually do something, versus another game that kind of relaxes it, right? And I went, oh my gosh, it's the same thing. Like if we look at these two games, like you win in Brood War because you can do more stuff more quickly. Like that is the like big thing in that game. You can control your units better, so on and so forth. In StarCraft 2, yeah, all of that stuff is still important, but it's like slightly relaxed, right? And all of a sudden, the strategic piece can come more into its own, right? You can have a Florencio, you can have a Haas, where all of a sudden you're playing in this weird space of like duping your opponent. And so this made me realize like, okay, there is a spectrum here, right? And we've seen other domains besides just RTS kind of playing with this spectrum as well, right? Chess has kind of done this too. And now here we sit, right? Maybe 3 years, 4 years away from a new crop of RTSs coming out. If anybody didn't watch PiG having the Frost Giant guys on the PiG show, oh my God, like I almost want to tell you to turn the stream off and go watch it right now. It's so fascinating, this idea of what do we think is fun RTS game design, right? Like, should it be more one way? Should it be more the other? Do we want to kind of have this variety where, you can play Brood War if you want that? You can play StarCraft 2. Like, what do you guys think is fun game design in RTS?
Ooh,
I know it's a big one, right? And I
question,
ambushed you.
Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think of so many different little anecdotes. I remember when, I think it was the Ognus, the American Terran player, when he retired, and he wrote a little blog saying, I'll always love StarCraft. I'm retiring, I'm moving on to other things. And he had this little description of like how when you hit 46 out of 46 and your supply depot finishes and you have exactly 100 minerals and 100 gas, and your stim pack starts, and like there's this like lining up, and like 3 upgrades finish just as your double drop unloads in their base, and just there was this like, for him, is very much this beauty in just lining up a build order to be optimized for certain moments in the game, and then trying to utilize those moments to the maximum. That's incredibly fun. I think some of the most interesting games that I really am like, this is my peak StarCraft experience, because I think it's so hard to expand beyond that. But I think maybe this will be something that you want to try and create as much of in the best RTS. It's games where there's many moments where we're in fear of death, but we're not actually killing each other, and we're constantly skirmishing. And I think it's cool if so that's a hard balance, because it's hard to strike a balance between, hey, you've actually got to respect each other. You don't just get a free pass. Like some games will be like, oh cool, so we just make it so it's like nearly impossible to kill each other, and therefore like you're both never dying. And it's like, no, but then you're no, that takes away the meaning of you guys being alive in those situations. It's when you're both parrying each other's attacks and stopping them, the other one's pivoting into something else. And it's especially, I think one of the most satisfying things is which I think a lot of RTS players, and this is more so a thing in Brood War, and it's my favorite thing about Brood War, it's why I love watching the game whilst I can't play it very well at all, is positional exchanges are fascinating to me. So I absolutely adore when a player is forced to give up ground and re-expand to the other side of the map, while also maybe pushing down. And like sometimes you'll see like you watch like an 8 times mini map, right? And you see like they kind of rotate, and then the other guy counterattacks, and they rotate sides of the map where they're expanding into the middle. And you see that a few times. And then you see those games where literally they wipe out each other's main bases and rebuild in different corners of the map. And you've got this just so many different interesting tactical reestablishments of where are the best defensive points, where are the potential attacking points that are exposed. For me, that's really cool. The more movement there is, the more action there is. I love it. For me, the most boring, frustrating points in StarCraft 2 have been on map pools where, cool, here's your natural with a nice tight choke point right next to your main. Here's your third right next to your natural, nice tight choke point. Or even the 3 bases in 1 base. I've always gone, oh, get out of here. Like for me, that's just not exciting. Oh, you get 3 bases on 1 base. Why? Because everyone either does the most crazy cheese or the most crazy macro build on it. And it plays to these extremes where you're like, well, it's so easy to get away with being greedy. I have to do the most extreme punish, or I have to play exceptionally greedy. We're both just like, you're being greedy too. Cool. I'll keep being greedy and outgreed your greed. And bam, you're both at 80 workers without interacting. So I think you have to always pay a price for expanding. I think it's cool when there's like different choices where you can mass expand or you can play a bit more tech oriented. I like that idea of covering the map is important. I like when there's intangible benefits, easily tangible benefits, I guess I should say, to map control, which Bly shows us on a daily basis in his Zerg versus Protoss and Zerg versus Terran, where he wins far too many games, where he is behind on every metric except map control. And he somehow turns map control into a win so consistently. You're like, you have nothing. You've just got 3 Ravages they can't deal with right now. He's like, yeah, I'm going to kill 6 depots with it. And then we're going to backstab them right when they move out because my Overlord's going to spot it. These Lings are going to kill 20 workers, barely going to defend their attack despite having less of everything. And then I'm going to win the game. And you're like, oh, that's cool. That's super cool. So I don't know if you guys picked up anything from that, but for me, I love the movement. I like dynamic gameplay.
Yeah, very cool. Interaction being a really important thing. I love that.
I think that I would second that Brood War is very interesting to me, and I played a bit of Brood War on the ladder when Remastered came out, and it's incredibly unforgiving to run the ladder on Brood War. It is a rough go when you're trying to learn the game and move up the ranks. And I will say that there have been a few players that did play the non-traditional weird style, and one most notably I think is Shine, who's the GSL observer and got the nickname Bag of Builds because he had so many different weird things he would do, and he made it all the way up to 2nd place that year that he had a great run where he lost to Flash, but who doesn't, right? So essentially he was the best player in the world except for Flash in that year. And it was non-traditional play. It was all this weird stuff, and it was freaking players of the traditional mechanical macro style out, and they couldn't deal with him. And I would say for myself, I really value and really like chess. It's one of those things that I grew up with. And one of the things I like about chess is the elegance of when things line up so beautifully and you can calculate 7, 8 moves ahead to a checkmate or something like that. Now, I've never been that great at it, but I like that elegance. And I see that more in Brood War than I see it in StarCraft 2, where
Mm.
StarCraft 2 is sometimes so fast and furious, and you have one battle and the game is decided at that one battle and it's over. Maybe that's why GSL is so exciting to watch, because oftentimes it goes longer and they can recover a little better than I can. But in Brood War, there's this sort of, there's this dance going on, and the game can, it doesn't just necessarily depend on whether you were looking at your army or not in that one moment. I think that's a really nice aspect. To me, I liken it to like playing piano, and it just everything lining up in such a beautiful way. But both games are great. They appeal to different audiences within our community. We all like RTSs. I would say we're kind of unique in that a lot of people don't even want to attempt to learn StarCraft because it's too hard. And I think there's a lot of beauty to both sides. I can see arguments for both Brood War style gameplay and StarCraft 2 style gameplay.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would have to add, love both of your takes on this. I think I definitely don't want to paint it as this or that, right? This concept exists on a spectrum, and I mean, you could very easily design a game that is even Brood Warrior than StarCraft Brood War, right? That the interface fights you even more, is more antagonistic to the player, right? And similarly, you could make something that is even less mechanically intensive than StarCraft 2. So it's really about where do you want to fall. And I think PiG and Edriseth, in the way that you talked about positional gameplay, you really both illustrated that, it isn't just as black and white as I just painted it about, how easy are the mechanics or not. There are a lot of other levers you can pull as a game designer to influence the shape of the game and the way that the narrative plays out. So really, really eager to see, where we go from here in the next couple of years. I think we probably ought to move on to some of the comments and questions here.
Q&A.
Yeah. You want to pull one off the stack here, Seth? Not, I can grab one.
I'm unprepared.
I got you covered. So let's see here. So Druid MDT had a comment here about similarity to baseball. So a lot of times, like, parents will force their kids to specialize into being a pitcher, right? You're 5 years old, whatever, playing t-ball. It's like, all right, son, you're going to be a pitcher. And it kind of pigeonholes them into like a subset of the game. On average, they may not improve at all of the like athletic fundamentals and that kind of thing. Like, literally just running, right? To play baseball, you need to be able to zip around some bases. And the quicker you can do that, the better you're going to be. And they mentioned, the generalist pitch successfully surpasses the specialist kid in college or minor league. So yeah, really, really kind of interesting. Clearly Druid's got some baseball background, either as a fan or a player. I always find it really elegant, right, when you can apply this stuff across domains and go, oh no, actually, like, all of this is just exactly the same shit over, like, just it might be StarCraft, it might be baseball that we're talking about, but like the way humans learn and get good at stuff is the same across everything, which is really cool, right? It makes the lessons in StarCraft portable to the rest of our lives in a pretty cool way.
I would say also that, range also makes the case that, it's not that hyper specialization doesn't work. There are people like Tiger Woods who made their whole career off of that, right? He was playing golf since he was a little kid. I think Serena Williams is another example, who was, from the time she was extremely young, only playing tennis and only doing, this sort of thing. So it can work. I think what the research is showing and the data that we're getting through the scientific type of studies on how the brain learns and on how people learn is that breadth of knowledge is going to be more effective overall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and especially the environment is so important there as well. So it's just how diverse, how wild, how unpredictable is that environment. Tennis is more unpredictable than golf, but like you are still hitting the ball within the line, you know,
Right.
compared to some things out there. Like I'm sure there's some very unkind situations, especially to do with business, where the fog of war is covering a lot of things. Like there is so much you don't know, where you're like, well, we're making decisions with incredibly limited information right now. So I'm I'm not sure where baseball falls on that spectrum, but yeah, I think in general, I've got for me, I imagine, I don't know, I wish I could spend more time around people who grew up with that like tiger parent hyper
Mm.
specialization in a sport or a field. Cause like I just imagine they'd be really weird, but I don't know. I'm like, are they all socially just ridiculous people? Like they just all they care about is winning and they can't be happy because like something in their fundamental brain chemistry is kind of messed up. Like because
Mm.
I gotta just this is the one thing that matters to me. And like what happens to people like that who only know one thing if their body fails them in sports especially. I think
Yeah.
that's a nightmarish situation where being a sports person is so insane because you're banking on your body, and if it fails, I mean, don't even get me started on the whole way like college sports works over in America, where I'm like, wait, you got to get through those years and you're not getting paid and hope your body holds up and then you start getting paid. And like, if
Yeah.
you make it a few years into the next part, you're all good. And if you get injured in your last year of college sport, well, GG, no re.
Yeah.
That's pretty rough. So, and that's for all athletes. So I think there's a lot of people where if they're super focused on one thing, and that's a competitive thing, it's not necessarily a specialization thing, but I'm sure there's a big carryover between the two where just my own intuition, I'm like, I might screw them up in some way. I guess we're all screwed up in our own ways. It's probably me over exaggerating it, but I'm like, man, now I wish I could just go hang out with Tiger Woods for like a few hours and like have a beer with him and like get a sense of who he is as a person, you know,
Mhm.
like, and like see him like, is there something weird there? Is he intimidating? I bet these sort of people would be so intimidating. They would have a mad presence about them, I'm sure.
Mm.
You could say this about Michael Jackson, which is, now we know a lot more about his life, but
Yeah.
he was pushed to be this music star from the early age, and it sure did mess him up, right?
Mhm.
In many, many, many ways.
So another
Captain Appa asked about off racing as a secondary learning exercise. What do you guys think about that?
I want to hear Pig talk about this because you made the switch, right? From I do one race to I do all the races. And I think you did that for content originally, right? But how did it change?
Yeah, I almost never did it as a pro player, and all the best pros have incredibly good off races. They all
Mm.
claim they almost never play it, but I'm sure they screw around on it a lot more than some of the other pro gamers. Scarlet is insane. Serral is insane. Raynor, I mean, back when we got Raynor and was it Raynor and Scarlet? I think had a sick match. Hero Marine, I'm sure Clem's great. Like all the Maru, Dark, those guys, every tournament you go to, if you go watch over their shoulder before the tournament starts, they're all off racing because they don't want to show any builds in the
Yeah.
practice area. They just want to warm up their mechanics. They're all so good at it. I think it's good just for perspective because I think it's almost like you're understanding just how the field, if it was a sports field, you're understanding the field. You're understanding because the way your opponent isn't just a person like you. So it's like you're playing against an alien. Imagine you were going boxing and you're boxing against a 9 foot tall octopus man. Like you want to understand how his anatomy works so that you're not, I'm punching him in the liver. And you're like, that's not where his liver is, dude. Like that doesn't hurt him at all. That's the strongest muscle on his body. Like people are like, oh, but it might dilute my practice. And I'm like, well, you at least need a little bit. And I think the best thing is it's also therapy. So the thing that you think is most imbalanced, like you want to make like a list of your hated things, and those are the things you mess around with when you're playing the other race, so that you can experience losing with it and get a little bit more of a realistic perspective.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Love that. Well, I think we'll do one more here because poor Pig has been on the call with us for an hour and a half, and he's doing this out of the goodness of his heart, folks.
We can do a few more. We can do a few more. It's all good. Up to you guys.
I think I've got one more that's pretty solid here. And I kind of want to mine this one because it really nicely I think ties together what we've been talking about. So Lord Cranial actually posed the question partway through our discussion here. Can you make a Wicked environment like StarCraft 2 into a kind environment by forcing a match into a situation that you have experience in? I have thoughts here, but I don't want to poison you guys. I'd love to hear from either of you first.
I'll let you go first, Adro, on this one. It's an
My
interesting cue.
opinion is that you're not necessarily making it into a kind learning environment if you're forcing it into an experience that you've already had before. This is actually what chess players do in general. The high level chess players, they don't really care about what opening you're doing. They want to force the end game into a situation that they're comfortable in. This is really the way that they want to win. They are comfortable in some certain situation with some certain set of pieces, and they want to put you in that position and put you in their game, battlefield, so to speak. And I don't necessarily think that that is a bad thing, but I don't think that it's actually a kind learning environment,
Mm.
because when we describe and identify kind learning environments, we more talked about it, or at least in the book, it's talked about as a sort of simplified environment that still has the desirable difficulty. So we still have things that would make us frustrated to learn, difficult to learn, but yet you can simplify to one or two variables that you're trying to obtain. Um, One of the things I did when I started streaming way back when Legacy came out, I switched to the core. And I remember Pig, actually, you talked about you had used the core. I don't know if you still use the core, but you used the core, and you would discourage people from necessarily learning the core because it was just something that you had done. And I picked up the core, and I think I tanked myself back to Gold League. But it was pretty simple in that only thing I was doing was redoing my hotkeys. I was relearning my hotkeys, right? So it's not like I was playing a different race. It wasn't. I was still doing the same build orders. I was still doing the same stuff that I would do. I was still playing the same maps that I would play, but instead I didn't know where the worker key was, and so I remember that time being incredibly frustrating because I was losing to players that I knew obviously I could beat. Um, but there was also this like good feeling of accomplishment that every time I did it, I was getting a little bit better and I was learning it. So I think that's more of what I interpret to be this kind learning environment.
Just where you can kind of repeat the same things and see that gradual progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, simplification, gradual progress, but you don't want to go into I'm going to the comfortable thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to make it. I'm trying to turn this game into my comfort zone because that's where you
Mm.
don't get the best learning.
I guess it's the
Yeah.
fact that it's well defined, right? It's like I know what the thing is that I'm trying to do, and I kind of know how to make it better.
So I guess that could be applied in general as well to, picking strategies. And I still do use the core, by the way. And there is a quick note on that. I think the core is great. I think most people who ask for tips from streamers are looking for a cheat sheet, and that is specifically why I tell people, nope. I'm like, if you want to, I have a command now in my chat. I'm like, go read this, go check it out. If you could be bothered reading through the threads and the resources and doing it, and learning it, it's good. If you've ever played an instrument or learned how to program or use any sort of complicated computer software, you will probably be way better at learning it. That's something. And musicians, programmers, they all pick it up like easy peasy because they know how to learn. A lot of people don't know how to learn that sort of mechanical skill that just takes a lot of repetitions and gradually programming, especially in a competitive thing like StarCraft, because they just keep going back to the old thing in the middle of learning the new thing. And I'm like, talk about like I imagine, when your headphones get all tangled up in a big ball of wires, like that's their neural lines when it comes to StarCraft. Because they're like, oh, I spent 3 months and I'm playing worse than ever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, like what you're doing is you're not really learning a new thing. You have those keys set up. You're occasionally using them. Sometimes you're using the old mechanics. You're bouncing between two different things. It's all confused. There's no calm patience. Every single loss you see as proof that you're doing it wrong. And every victory you see as proof that you're doing it right. And it's the complete opposite. If you're winning early on when you've changed your mechanics, probably doing things wrong, probably not taking enough time. You should be losing. You should be
Yeah.
focusing on building the right neural connections. Stimulus, response, not, ah, shit, do that thing that I know to do in this situation to try to win the game. No, that's got to be like third wave. So, yeah. So sorry, just a lot of people have asked me that over the years, and it's really interesting how you just see different levels of learning in different people.
Mhm.
But in terms of making an environment, yeah, kind or unkind, you can do it, I guess, with your strategies a little bit as well, right? Where by putting the blinders on and saying, roaches only, you're just taking a few variables out in terms of, I don't know. Actually, that's just more about having focus. It's allowing you
Mhm.
to focus in on certain things. That's more about density of practice more than anything. It's not really kind or unkind. Because I'm thinking of like, if you play roaches rather than trying to do the whole variety of tech, all you're doing is you're trying to increase frequency. That's not really changing. Either way, getting more repetitions will make you a better player with that. But it's just the fact that because it's hard to encounter the same situations in StarCraft, that's, even by doing that, you're still going to be having many situations which turn the rules upside down. Like I was talking about, it doesn't matter if you're just massing roaches. Force fields on a ramp are going to turn a good attack into a bad attack. Tunneling claws is going to turn a useless army into a good army in some situations. It's attacking the third base and denying it while swapping into something else. You can secure a really great lead. Forcing your way into the tanks on the cliff is going to always lose you the game. So there's still so many complicated rules that are constantly changing. I don't know if that necessarily makes it any kinder or not, but I think it just limits the number of situations so you at least can become an expert in that little area of wicked gaming that is StarCraft, of understanding all of the crazy roach situations at least, rather than and the Hydra situations and the Muta situations and the Broodlord situations all at once. Because then your mind gets scattered and it becomes very hard to internalize and remember things.
Yeah, very cool. So maybe a way to sort of formalize that is it doesn't make it not wicked, but you're able to choose, you're able to bite off a small piece of the wickedness and say, okay, I'm going to tame this part. And maybe even I'll try to force my games into the little wicked area that I do kind of understand so that it doesn't hurt quite so bad. I'm tempted to take this one from Grim Reaper. What do you guys think? And then call it a show.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. I was just reading that.
So Grimmy asks, what do we think is happening when there's a player that grossly outperforms with a certain builder style, especially when better, scare quotes, better players try it for worse results. So like other players trying Parting's 4-gate Blink Prism thing, StarCraft 2 is complicated enough for one to say Parting has more range when playing X style, even though others might criticize him for playing the same build every time, like versus Maru in the GSL. Thoughts, gentlemen?
This is something I've just been thinking about that because I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I think it is actually not his range so much as his specialization that makes him successful. But I do agree he does have more range with that build. So what I mean by that is I think range wise, Parting does have more transitions, moving into different things or using the units in different ways. But I think if you think about it, that Maru series, let's just take that one in isolation. Parting was like, I will blink in and I will force the fight and I will kill lots of stuff. And there was I'm never taking a third base before 7 minutes or whatever the time. Like it's so late, right? Like it was always like 44 probes or 41, whatever it is, and just stalkers. But he definitely. So this is we're gonna get very semantic to some extent, but I feel like it's not so much range as it is he had different specialized ways of using those stalkers. You could argue that's range within that miniature mini game. So I kind of get what Grim is saying. Yeah, it's like mini range within that situation, right? Because sometimes he'd blink in the natural and he'd like work this he'd take out one tank and then he'd fall behind the gases and he'd work this insane angle where he's just out of tank range, but he could do the same thing in the main and he could do the same thing right in the middle of the production and take out the tanks there and just kill you, which he did some games as well, and get the stim and stuff like that. So he definitely had many ways of using those stalkers. And like, yes, we saw like stats and stuff like, oh, he did it, I could do it. And they just like blink their stalkers in the middle every game, lose 5 of them. And you're like, and like there was tiny details that allowed him to do that. He was always better with his observer usage to see exactly where they were set up. He clearly, I think, though, the reason why I specify this as a specialization, I feel like a lot of the time parting would see like one little bit of the setup, just a few, like a second of looking at the setup, and he would know where to go. To me, that at its heart is specialization. It's where you've got a sort of pattern recognition. You go, I do variant 1, or I do variant 13, or I do variant 2, and you just, the stalker's going here, finds the opening, bam, 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 because he's recognized that pattern. That's my way of seeing it. So I see him as an ultra specialist in that build, and we see that it's successful. If you can be the best in the world at that, hells yeah.
I think, we've seen this a time again, actually, in StarCraft, where somebody figures something out and it brings them great success, and they're the only one in the world can do it. Beyond did this a couple years ago with Reapers, and they had to nerf Reapers twice to make it so that, it wasn't OP. And other players like Maru tried to pull it off and made himself look kind of silly because he couldn't do what Beyond did. Gumiho won a GSL on the back of learning how to use battle mech, and nobody else could deal with it. So I think this is something that comes up time and time again. And if you haven't listened to our episode on tacit knowledge, I would say go back to tacit knowledge and listen to it, because we talk about this idea of pattern recognition, modeling, and it's something that we can learn to do. But if your stats and you watched parting do this thing and you want to reproduce it, and you're trying to reproduce it without having this database of knowledge that parting has built up because he's either practiced it with partners or done it on the ladder or whatever the case may be, so he knows exactly where and when and what timing, and when he sees this configuration of buildings in the main, do this. When you see this, go to the natural. Having that in his brain allows him to run the model through in every scenario and make something be successful. And also, pro players are always cutting so many corners to get the most optimum, fastest, efficient, whatever build out. So then when another pro player who's very, very good tries to reproduce it, but doesn't have that database of knowledge, you see failures. And I think that's what is going on. That's having thought about, the way tacit knowledge works and the way, we can reproduce things. I think that's what's going on.
Very cool. Well, guys, I think that's a great way to cap off a discussion. Unless either of you has any closing thoughts here on the book.
It's a great book. Read it.
Yeah, I think it's mind expanding. It's mind expanding, and I think it's especially reassuring for everyone who has meandering focus and is constantly being told by the world that you're suboptimal and you're not following the proper road to success. This book is a real affirmation of holy shit, maybe I was doing it right all along. So anyone out there, especially self-critical, it's not always criticism for outside. A lot of the time we do it to ourselves. It's really cool. I think it changes. I think it's kind of shifting a paradigm in my own head about what success looks like and what learning looks like. So I think everyone should read it.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you again, Pig, for joining us. I think there's no better guy to raid after this show but Vibe, so I think that's what we're gonna have to do here. Let's go light up Vibe's chat. There's a small handful of us, but we could certainly make it rain PogChamps and other fun emotes over there. Thank you once again, Pig. Everybody, please check out his socials. If you want to support the archives, that is available to do as well. There are social links here in chat for that. Huge thank you to Pig once again, everybody. He did this out of the goodness of his heart. We're on a shoestring budget here at the archives. So thank you, Pig, and everybody please go hype up Vibe.